Hello, Patriotic Christian here. I'm starting this YouTube channel because I'd like to be able to explain and simplify things that I think maybe some people need a little help with. So I'm starting this channel, and I am intending to be doing this from a biblical worldview and in a historical perspective. Now, what I'm going to start with is something that's extremely basic, but I think a lot of people today misunderstand. You know, there's a lot of debate about what rights people have, and I think it's very important that you start with where your rights come from. And then, of course, you have to understand the basic concepts of rights and how to apply them. And so, of course, the first thing is, from a biblical worldview, we know that we get our rights from our Creator. God created us, and He made us in His image. Therefore, we have certain rights, and we need to be able to understand that. And the best way that I've been able to try and illustrate that is with this diagram that I did here. So if we were created by our Creator, we are inherently valuable, and we do have these rights naturally, okay? So I'm illustrating this with, you got person A and person B. Now, excuse my imperfect drawing here, but each person has equal rights, and I drew a square around them to illustrate that person's sort of jurisdiction, if you will. Now, in order for person A and person B to have equal rights, it must mean that they have a boundary here, this line between the two. Okay, they shouldn't cross over into the other person's boundary, otherwise that's imposing or infringing upon that person's right, and they would be wrong to do that. So here in the second diagram, I've got person A and person B, but if you notice, there's a bit of a difference here. It's because person A has usurped a little bit of what should belong to person B. Okay, I mean, they're grabbing a bigger chunk of rights, and it comes at the expense of person B. And it's important to understand this because sometimes people say they have a right to something, and they end up in a way imposing on another person. It's like if someone were to say, I have a right to eat, and that's true, they do have a right to eat, okay? But with that right to eat also comes the right to provide the food for yourself, or the responsibility to provide the food for yourself. Okay, and I'm not talking about like infants and stuff, that's a whole other issue. But in order to have what some people would say the right to eat, and what they mean is a right to be fed, which means that in order to have a right to be fed, not necessarily to eat what they provide, it requires someone else provide the food. And this is how you would get an infringement onto person B, because if person A, by saying he has a right to eat, means he has a right to be fed, someone else, let's say person B, would then have to in some way provide that food for person A. And so that's a basic illustration of how the boundaries should be and how rights ought to be understood. In order for it to be equal, both people, both A and B, have a right to eat, but they also have the responsibility to provide their own food for themselves. So another thing that might be a little bit misunderstood about this is when it comes to property rights and basic property rights. And I've kind of made this illustration here, down here, like imagine if each one of these squares represented a person's property. Okay, and each person has a right to their own property, and they shouldn't infringe on another person's property, obviously. But what if your property is right here in the middle? Okay, what if your property is there, and in order to access your property or to leave it, you have to cross someone else's property. and maybe they're not willing to let you do that. Okay, so you're stuck on your property, or maybe you're stuck off of your property because of these other people. And so this is where you get into the realm of collective rights, or perhaps just the idea of having a community and, well, public property. Okay, because the solution has been that even though these people all have equal property rights, and this person of course has equal property rights too, if they wanted to leave their property but couldn't because these people were preventing them, then they're actually infringing upon their right to leave and return to their property. So it's not right either. And so this is how you get like a public property in between. You all decide that the way to solve this is to just, you each give up a little bit of property around the edge of each one's property, and you build roads, by everyone funding it together. And so that's the basic concept for that. Now, what really needs to be understood more than any of that in today's political realm is, how do we apply this idea of personal rights in the rest of society? How is it that you have perhaps a government, a collective ability? And it all stems from you having individual rights. Okay, because if you have an individual right, you therefore have the ability to delegate that to a government for your own convenience. So as an example, so you have a right of self-defense. Okay, because if somebody infringes, if person A is going to infringe on person B knows that person A is wrong, and they can push back and sort of reclaim this line where it should be. Okay, and person B is perfectly just in doing so, because everyone's rights are equal. And if you have a community of people together and they decide, we don't want to all have to constantly defend our property, so we're gonna allocate a few resources, and we're gonna have a government that will, for the most part, protect us for us, right? Now, they're perfectly justified in doing that because they have the right themselves individually. Therefore, they have the option of delegating some of that authority to another party. Okay, and that's important to understand, because many people today want government to do things for them that they themselves do not have the right to do themselves. And it's a really big problem, because when you think about it this way and you just understand it from a basic perspective, that if you don't have the right to do it yourself, then what gives you the right to delegate that to government to do for you? Person A doesn't have the right to go and take property from person B. Okay, they just don't. Person B would then be justified in defending their property against the encroachments by person A. But in this example here, person A has encroached on B. Now, what if the encroachment wasn't individual? What if they didn't personally go and take person B's property? What if instead they empowered a third party, such as a government, to go and take the property from person B on their behalf and then give it to them? So that's them carving out additional territory for themselves at the expense of person B. And it's just as wrong, perhaps even more wrong, for someone to have government steal on their behalf as it is for them to just go and steal it, themselves. And so that's the basic concept that I think is very misunderstood today, and I think it's very helpful if people can understand it correctly, so that when you start dealing with politics or any of this other who to vote for and all this kind of stuff, if you understand the basic idea of what rights are, where they come from, and how they apply, then it's really easy for the other stuff to fall in line pretty quick. You're not going to fall for the charlatans that promise you everything and promise that government is going to do this and do that. But what you should be thinking is wondering like, well, wait a minute. Can I do that for myself legitimately? And if the answer is no, then you cannot legitimately empower government to do it either. So I hope this is helpful, and I hope to have many more videos to come.